So I first want to thank Jack for taking time to meet with us. Folks here from Olathe have been doing a lot of work around improving the community, improving the economy, improving equity throughout that. And Region 10 has been working with the town and with making Olathe better and the business hub for the past couple of years. And so in a recent meeting, we were discussing Opportunity Zone. And so the steering committee was really interested in learning more about it. And so what I really love in being able to do this with a webinar is that we can record it, and we're going to be sharing it with others who are interested in learning more and getting an overview and getting that working understanding of that. So thanks to Paul for getting this set up and organized. Want to thank Jack for joining us. So first, because we're a small group, and maybe Lynette, Darren, and Roland can introduce yourselves. And then when Greg gets on the phone, we can introduce him. But so Jack has a sense of who you are and what work you're doing in Olathe. So Lynette, do you want to start?
Hi, everyone. I know most of you. Jack, thanks for joining us. My name is Lynette Roland, and I have two jobs here in Olathe. One of them is working with a group called The Mob. You can see by my little screen, Making Olathe Better. We're an organization that has been around for about 4 years. We're operating under funding from the Colorado Trust on a health equity grant. And we have a lot of little projects going and a couple big ones. We are beginning to open a co-working space here in Olathe. We're also going to be starting a group of interpreter and translators so that we can help people communicate better with each other. And we've got a couple of things lined up for the future with a youth entrepreneurship camp and a family leadership training institute. So I guess I shouldn't joke, they're kind of all big projects, but so I'm the coordinator of all that business, and been working with the town for several years on trying to get things better. We want to change Olathe into a thriving and welcoming community. So thank you for joining us.
Of course, nice to meet you.
Thanks, Lynette. Darren.
Hi, Jack. I'm Darren Westerman. Nice to meet you. I am also involved with the Mob, and I'm one of the trustees with the City Council, and just really looking forward to what you have to teach us.
Great. Roland?
Hi, I'm Roland Hudson. I'm mayor, town of Olathe. I've grown up here, went to school here. I've been on the board previously in the early 2000s. I've been involved in other boards and looking forward to what you have to say.
Thanks, Roland.
Greg? Are you, here, let me unmute you. Yeah, Paul, if you can get you unmuted.
Okay, we're unmuted. Okay, I'm Greg Davidson. I'm on the Board of Trustees for the town of Olathe, and I'm looking forward also to hearing what you have to tell us today. Hi, Trish.
Hi.
Hi, Linda.
Paul, introduce yourself. I know you've been talking with Jack, but.
Hi, Jack. How are you today? Paul Stockwell. So I'm working with Trish and Region 10 to do economic development activities in Olathe.
Great, thanks.
Good to see your face, Paul.
So, so Jack, I want to introduce him also, and this is the first time I've read your bio, Jack. I love your background and the diversity of experience that you bring. So he's been with the Office of Economic Development as the Opportunity Zone program manager since January. And after he graduated from Tulane University, he became an award-winning newspaper reporter and co-founded, I don't know if I'm saying this right, Faubourg Farms, which is an urban
close enough.
Okay, that was part of a health-oriented redevelopment in New Orleans. And then after that, he headed to the University of Texas, Austin to get his master's in community and regional planning with a focus on sustainable economic development. And then he came to Denver after that and worked with the Urban Land Institute. So Jack is a birder, a gardener, a muffin enthusiast, and an Ironman finisher. So very impressed and love that background. So thank you so much for spending time with us. I'm going to turn it over to you. You can share your screen, and Jack will do a presentation. This is going to be pretty informal, but there will also be time for Q&A afterwards.
Sounds good. And thank you for the introduction, Trish. Yeah, feel free to jump in with questions at any point. We will have time for questions at the end, but it's a small group, so feel free if I start moving too fast, slow me down, ask me questions, don't hesitate. Let me share my screen. A moment. All right, can everyone see my slide? Great. All right, so thank you again for Trish and Paul for inviting me to join you and discuss the OZ program. You know, this is, as is often repeated from our office, the program is really only as strong as the local engagement is, and there's definitely a direct relationship between you know, how much kind of grassroots local effort goes into planning and promoting their opportunity zones, and how much activity actually happens. So you all are well along the way just by being proactive and learning and figuring that all out. So thank you again, and excited to talk OZs with you. I'll warn you, I'm going to start on a gloomy note. And that is that the American dream is in peril. And this is one of the big motivations behind the OZ program itself. So if you think about the American dream as being able to earn more than your parents, we've seen a pretty significant drop in that in the past 50 or so years, to the point where if you're born in 1984, you're about 40% less likely to out-earn your parents in absolute dollars than you would have been 50 years before that. And at the same time, if you think of the American dream as economic mobility, the ability to go from the bottom percentile of income earners to the top fifth, we're unfortunately not performing very well on that front either. With that said, though, it's not in peril everywhere, and there is actually more variation in economic mobility within the country than there is when you compare the U.S. to other similar countries. So this map on the left here kind of shows the probability of moving from the bottom quintile, the bottom 20% up to the top 20% in income. And you can actually see, as you look out towards the Mountain West in Colorado, you're a lot more of those lighter shades, which means a lot greater likelihood of being able to move economically. And then the map on the right is very zoomed in the DC metro area, and I think that just kind of demonstrates that in a matter of miles, your likelihood of moving from the bottom really has everything to do with the county and the zip code and the census tract that you were born into. And the folks who did this research, and this research really played a pretty big role in the OZ program itself, kind of concluded that either you can make an effort to kind of bring folks to areas that have greater opportunity, or you can try and create more opportunity in distressed communities by trying to channel more investment into it. And so that's kind of one half of what inspired the OZ program. And the other is capital access. So where is that investment coming from? unfortunately, that math has gotten pretty uneven as well. We now see 75% of venture capital is concentrated in New York, Massachusetts, and California, all coastal urban areas. And then other means of supporting small businesses and kind of getting the capital you need to get a leg up in this economy, those have faded pretty significantly, especially since the recession. We've seen a big drop off in community banks, small business lending. And even when you look at mission-oriented capital, CDFI funding is not quite stretching across the country like we would like it to. And similarly, grants are not hitting the distressed communities that we would like them to address. So there's the doom and gloom. So just to summarize the first couple points, economic mobility is absolutely a place-based issue. Second, one of our best tools, investment, is really not very equally available across the country, especially in inland and rural communities. And that's what inspired the Opportunity Zone program, is to be a part of the solution and reinvesting in distressed communities. So now, what actually are Opportunity Zones? They're a federal incentive that were part of the 2017 tax reform bill. They were introduced with bipartisan support from Senators Tim Scott and Cory Booker. And in short, it's an incentive to support investment into distressed communities through long-term equity investments. And those investments can go either into businesses or real estate ventures, or kind of some gray area in between with more kind of infrastructure projects, public-private partnerships. And kind of one of the key points that we'll probably hit on a few times in this conversation is that the program is ultimately very flexible, and that is one of its huge benefits. But specifically, it works through deferral, reduction, and potential elimination of taxes on capital gains. And the incentive is to reinvest capital gains from a previous sale of a stock or property. Darren, you holding your hand for a question? Saw some movement there. You're muted. I guess we're good.
No. I was just letting the customer know, just walked in, that I needed to mute the screen. So sorry to interrupt.
No problem at all. As to the zones themselves, so each state was allowed to nominate up to 25% of its economically distressed census tracts. So that means areas with 20% poverty rate were considered. And I'll discuss a bit later kind of the state strategy on nominating those zones. But what does it mean for the communities that receive the OZ designation? It's three big things. Again, as I said a couple slides before, it's investment into real estate, and that can take the form of anything from workforce housing, industrial projects, historic preservation. It could be restaurants, and could really run the gamut. It also supports investments into operating businesses, and that is something that we are seeing more and more of recently. Generally, you're better positioned to take on OZ capital if you are pretty early on and you don't already have too many assets as part of your business. And of course, you do need to be willing to give up the ownership in the business, which can be a limitation sometimes. And again, we are seeing more and more public-private partnerships. That will actually be the subject of our next big statewide webinar on how governments and investors are partnering up and making big investments in things like broadband, renewable energy, the whole works. Pretty much anything but a highway. I don't think we can take that on. And then lastly, this has nothing to do with direct equity investment, but to kind of support the OZ incentive at the federal level, they're also giving preference points to grants that kind of apply all throughout different government initiatives. So that could be anything from agriculture, brownfield redevelopment, infrastructure, schools. If a project is simply located in an opportunity zone and you apply for a grant, regardless of if you're taking on private investment, the government will kind of bump you up in consideration for those grants. So here's just about as simple of a chart as we can make from what is actually a pretty complicated incentive. So how they work is a taxpayer realizes capital gains through the sale of a stock or property. They then, within 180 days, reinvest those capital gains into what is called a qualified opportunity fund. And that is usually an LLC. It can be just two people in a partnership. It can be a much broader kind of institutional fund as well. And we are seeing more of the smaller funds of recent, which I think is encouraging. So those funds then invest directly or indirectly into what is qualified opportunity zone property, basically any real estate or business assets that are located within an opportunity zone. I'll pause and take a breath there. Is there anything unclear, or am I going too fast or anything? Great. So to just go a bit deeper on the investor benefits. So the first benefit is just on the original, on the taxes that would have been owed on the original sale of a stock or property. The first benefit is that you just get to defer paying that that tax bill until 2026, until the end of 2026. The second benefit is, again, this applies to the tax on the original capital gain. You essentially would have to pay 10% less once that tax bill comes due at the end of 2026. You would owe 10% less on that capital gain. And I'll give an example to kind of more concretely show what this means for investors. The third benefit, and this is generally way more attractive to investors than the other two, is once you've reinvested your capital gains into a new project, you are eligible to completely eliminate, you do not owe any capital gains tax if that new project appreciates. And that really can have a way more significant benefit. So if we think of the example of, if you sell a property, let's say you invested $1 million into a property, you sell it for $2 million, then you have $1 million in capital gains. Through this benefit, again, you wouldn't have to pay the tax until 2026. And at that point, that $1 million capital gain, you would only owe taxes on 90% of that gain. So $900,000 would be taxable out of that $1 million capital gain. And so essentially assuming a 20% capital gains rate, it pretty much means you're either paying $200,000 in taxes on that original gain or $180,000. So, maybe a $20,000 difference in this example. But then let's say that using that $1 million, you're able to replicate what you did with your first property, and it grows from at about an 8% rate annually over 10 years, and it doubles in value from $1 million to $2 million. You now have another $1 million capital gain, and this time you owe zero on that. So that's the difference between owing $200,000 and owing $0. So again, that kind of shows it's a tenfold increase in the tax benefit to that third benefit, that 10-year benefit. But that is obviously less certain than the first two of just being able to defer the original gain. Really, no matter how well the new project that you invest in goes, you know that those first two benefits will apply. The third is kind of the kicker if it goes well. And forgive me if you've heard this before in the opportunity zone world, because I know I hear about every day. But they say that the opportunity zone incentive doesn't make a bad project good, it makes a good project great. And I think this kind of demonstrates that. Just to look at, again, this, we don't need to get into too much detail on the structure, but this just kind of is another way of illustrating. So you have an investor, the investor realizes the capital gain. If they choose to reinvest it into an opportunity zone, they form a qualified opportunity fund. And then that fund can either directly invest into businesses or real estate, or they can form basically an intermediary company, make an indirect investment. So you could, in the, I'm sorry about all the acronyms. It's a deep ocean of acronyms in the opportunity zone world, but the fund either directly invests in QOZBP, qualified opportunity zone business property, or they have a qualified opportunity zone business that is the intermediary between the property and the fund itself. Really, the only important thing to know between these two kind of strategies is that with indirect investment, there's a lot more flexibility. You have more time to deploy your capital. There's more flexibility as to how much of the assets you invest in are physically located in an opportunity zone. You're able to have 70 as opposed to 90% of the property or the assets that you're investing in physically located in the zone. So for that reason, especially with more institutional investors, but just in general, from our conversations with OZ accountants and lawyers, perhaps because it's in the accountants and lawyers' interest, you see way more of the indirect strategy in this realm. So looking at the timeline, again, there's, let's say you make an investment today. If you hold for 5 years, then you get that first 10% decrease in what you owe on your original capital gain. As of the end of 2026, that is when you will owe the tax bill for the original gain. That is also the last tax year as of now that you can take capital gains and reinvest them into an opportunity fund. So you have 6 months from when you take the money out of the original investment and reinvest it. So the last date to put your money into an opportunity fund is it's the end of June in 2027. And I think this is useful. We do try to instill some urgency in communities because, you know, the short-term kind of, you know, as I said, more incremental benefits. We already had kind of one of those benefits expire at the end of 2019, and the 5-year benefit will expire at the end of 2021. So in some sense, there's a lot of urgency to move money into funds and projects by the end of 2021. At the same time, investors can still get that big 10-year benefit even if they invest as late as halfway through 2027. And then this also isn't depicted on the timeline, but the money needs to be pulled out by 2046. And I'll get into this. There is some potential changes to the statute that there could be more flexibility in those dates than there is currently. So just to kind of to sum up what we've gone over so far, what makes OZs unique, it is an incentive that is tied directly to capital gains. So it's applying to folks that already have invested and kind of are experienced in that realm, but whose capital is typically concentrated within just a few specific areas. And the motivation of the program is to really target specific areas that could both really benefit and use that investment, but that also where there's good promise in the ability to turn it into a profit for investors. Another key point is that it really relies on and rewards patient capital. You don't see investors like merchant developers who are looking to develop crappy apartments and sell them off in 2 years and then watch as the building crumbles once they've divested of it. They really are long-term invested both in the specific projects that they're putting their money into, but also in the community, in the zone that was designated. And again, with that concentration and often with multiple investors doing different projects in the same zone, we start to see a kind of cumulative, even potential exponential impact. Again, it's another key aspect is that it's equity. There are a lot of grants and loans out there, and those work for a lot of businesses and can do a lot. But if you're looking for an equity partner, this is a pretty, it can be hard to come by, and this makes it a lot easier to come by. And I think the only other point I want to highlight out of this is that it is flexible. I've kind of outlined all of the different types of projects that it can support. It's flexible in that, unlike some other incentives we have at the Office of Economic Development, you can pair it with multiple incentives. We've seen, this is hard to pull off with the timing, but we've seen low-income housing tax credits, we've seen historic preservation tax credits, enterprise zone. Those can all be paired with opportunity zone investments, and really it's just a matter of kind of getting the timelines of the investors and the other tax credits lined up. And speaking of timelines, the final point is that it moves at the speed of the market, and that it is also unlimited in that, unlike a tax credit where we might have $750,000 or whatever it is in a given year that a state or the federal government can allot to investors, it's unlimited in that aspect, and it also, the timing isn't quite as tricky as it would be for, say, with a low-income housing tax credit. You can start a project without knowing whether or not you'll get whether you get 4 or 9% benefits. And with this, as long as your investor's in, you know what you're getting. I'll take another breath here. Any questions at this point? Great. So I just want to highlight a few examples again to show the flexibility and just some of the different ways that this has manifested itself across Colorado. The first example is out in Aurora near the Denver International Airport. I saw a pretty massive industrial logistics center that got built through Opportunity Zone Capital. In Craig, I actually just learned about this a couple weeks ago. They have a really exciting food hall project that has received some OZ funding out in Fort Morgan to the east. There's a workforce housing project that got some good kind of leverage and support from the local government, and that seems to be moving along well. Your neighbors in Montrose have seen 2 operating businesses receive OZ capital. I think you all are somewhat familiar with proximity space. I saw it in your business development plan. Wedge Brands is another example. So proximity, if you're not familiar, is both a co-working space and a technology platform for co-working spaces. And Wedge Brands is an outdoor retailer, both operating businesses that got investment. And then lastly, in Natarita, there's a, I guess what you'd call a glamping project called Camp V that is also kind of currently going through a round of OZ funding and have already locked them up. So I show these 5. There are dozens and dozens more, but I think this just kind of shows both how this works with different geographies, how it can meet different community needs. It can take the form of real estate projects. It can have lots of government support. It can have zero government, or, well, preferably at least have some buy-in. But there's just a great variety in what kind of projects we can see built through this. I would say probably the only need that ODs, there are a few, but the only real primary need that ODs can't address is home ownership. And that's again because of the long-term, investors wanting to stay in for 10 years. You can't sell a home. You can't wait 10 years to sell a home once you build it. So unfortunately, that doesn't quite apply, but still, as it applies to rental and workforce affordable housing, it definitely works there. Then here are just a few other examples. These are actually pulled from our Opportunity Zone Capital Accelerator program. I'll talk a bit more about that as I go into what we do in our office at OEDIT. But this just again shows some of the kind of diversity of industries and geographies that get to that can benefit from the program. So we've seen everything from an environmental services consulting company, a dog water park and grooming business, a moving company out to the east in Sterling, an ed tech company that is pretty well positioned post-COVID, and then another that's doing really interesting stuff, supporting veterans through essentially redeveloping old office buildings into essentially a co-working space and affordable housing for veterans. So again, it runs the gamut, and these examples are pulled all from across the state. And if you all know of any businesses out in Olathe that might be interested, our second cohort is currently open for applications. That closes on Monday, August 31st. So definitely some urgency there, but it is not too late, and it's a pretty extensive multiple round application process, but we are doing a little extension. If you get your first round application in by the 31st, you have another 2 weeks to complete the process. So just something to keep in mind there. But regardless of whether any businesses from your region participate in the program, the goal is really just to show both to make businesses and investors comfortable with direct investments into operating businesses, and hopefully we'll have kind of create a template that can be more broadly applicable across the state. So I've gone pretty far without actually saying what my job is, and so now would probably be a good time to jump into that. So what do we do at OEDIT? What do I do? Our mission is to position Colorado as a leading destination for capital investment in opportunity zones and to benefit distressed communities. And really what this means for me is to not to kind of dictate from our perch in Denver what should happen within opportunity zones, but to talk to local economic development groups like yourself and to kind of see where their needs are and how the incentive could help meet them there. There are 4 key pillars to our program, one of which is behind us, at least barring any changes in legislation. So again, we were the entity that was responsible for actually putting forth the nominations for the zones. We were able to, again, nominate up to 25% of the low-income tracts across the state. And I think what's notable for Colorado is that we, unlike nationwide, where about 70% of the nominated zones or designated zones were urban, we flipped that. We were about 70-30 rural to urban. And that's reflected when you look at our statewide map of zones. You see, again, it's at the census tract level, so that we see some really big, kind of not as dense census tracts that were included in our zones. And I think as we can kind of discuss as we wrap, I think that is unintentionally positioned Colorado, and particularly Western and rural Colorado, really well for post-COVID investment. So that's the nomination piece. Education, again, we do lots of presentations like these throughout the state, talking to local stakeholders, to investors, business owners, the whole works. We put on pitch events. Community support, that's obviously part of the education piece as well, but we do have 2 grants that we administer from OEDIT, as well as another grant through our partners at the Department of Local Affairs. And I'll touch on those in a moment. I have another slide for those. And then lastly, we kind of play a facilitation role between kind of getting projects to figure out, how they can make it work with opportunity zone investment, and getting them in front of and to the table with investors. So I mentioned our accelerator program for operating businesses. That's definitely one piece of it. We also have a website called Co-Invest, which you can find at colorado-invest.com or coinvest.co. And that, again, it's to play the matchmaker. You can upload projects to that website, have them on the map, and investors are able to filter if they're interested in, say, workforce housing in Western Colorado. They could click off those 2 filters and just see, maybe a dozen or so projects that could be a good fit for them. And this is hugely beneficial to the actual project leads, as well as the folks in government that are supporting the projects. But for the project leads, they're actually able to access a list of contacts for the investors through that website. Looking at grants, so as I mentioned, we have 2 that we administer from the Office of Economic Development. We have a technical support grant, which can run the gamut from $2,000 up to, we recommend $10,000, but we've seen them given out for as much as $20,000. And these are really intended for early stage kind of feasibility studies, or creating a master plan for a kind of broader, in one case, there's a kind of mixed use redevelopment that we supported a grant for workforce housing, figuring out the feasibility. What can a developer expect to see if they invest in workforce housing in a given area? Those are a couple of things we've seen on that front. We also have a mini grant that is for up to $2,000, and similar to the technical support grant, it's kind of to support projects in their early stages. And one example, I wrote examples, but and then only wrote one, is because we've only given out 2 of these. And but another example, your neighbors in Gunnison received a grant for a hotel project in their downtown. And this supported marketing materials to get to the table with investors. And then lastly, our partners over at the Department of Local Affairs have the READY grant. I read your business development plan, and I saw that DOLA was already a partner in it. So I'm not sure if this was through that grant or not, but if you all are interested in creating an investment prospectus, which I'll talk about in just a second here, I would recommend applying for the DOLA grant first, as those are targeted to rural communities, and I think they've got a bit more in the coffers than we do for our grants. But again, if you all have any questions about whether it's the OEDIT or the DOLA grant, I'm happy to further discuss later. So jumping in, how can communities really position themselves to benefit from this incentive? The first thing is knowing what investors are looking for, and then kind of working back from there. So here's what we know is that, again, it doesn't make a bad project good, it makes a good project better. So it is a great incentive, but most investors, at least, these are seasoned investors who are pulling their money out of other projects that presumably went well, so they have capital gains. So they do want to see pretty strong 12 to 15% returns is typically what we see. That said, there are quite a few impact investors in the space, many of whom do invest in rural Colorado, and they're willing to take a little bit less, maybe 8 or 9% annually. Again, these are long-term investments. They want to know at the end of 10 years, whether it's real estate or a business, how are they going to exit in 10 years? They want to know that going in. Again, because the rules kind of make it so that you need to quickly, once you realize the capital gain, redeploy that capital. It's harder to create a multi-asset fund, and for that reason, investors typically look on a project-by-project basis, and they don't always know if they're looking at again, some of our rural communities. They don't always know where to start, and for that reason, again, we really think that the prospectus can be a good guide to show them where the opportunities are. I try to pinch myself every time I say opportunity when I talk about opportunity zones. And then lastly, they want to see community support. They want to know that there's buy-in all around, and that there won't be protests outside the city hall when they announce a new project. So with that in mind, from the community's perspective, there's really kind of 3 buckets that communities fall into. In some cases, and this is more common with the urban communities, but sometimes they don't want all that much new investment from outside of their area coming in, and the strategy could just be to constrain and to really kind of make sure that they're specifically targeting only what they and their community wants. On the other hand, some communities are seeing more disinvestment and are more eager to kind of position themselves for any kind of OZ investment. And again, there's also kind of that Goldilocks zone in the middle. But kind of worth thinking about where you fall on that spectrum as you think about creating a prospectus and engaging with investors. So what is a prospectus? For us, it's basically it's a guide to investors. It kind of toes the line between telling a story and giving the hard data that investors want to see. And I think our big recommendation, we've seen probably a dozen of these prospectuses, maybe more across the state, and they really are the kind of foundational building block for success in OZs. And the ones that we've seen that are most successful, again, they have that hard data. They're specific down to the level of, these are the parcels of land that we think would be most attractive. These are the specific projects that we want to see. That really gives confidence to the investors that there's that alignment that they're looking for. And the last point I think is an important one. It's not just to market the zones to investors. It's also to kind of be realistic. They know that if it was designated as an opportunity zone, it means that there are issues they need to overcome, and there are risks. And I think it's not wise to just entirely gloss over them, and rather to kind of show them how they can be part of that revitalization story. So thinking about where to start, it starts with the needs, and kind of finding the right overlap between the problems that need to be addressed and the kind of innovative ways of moving forward. So we think about, a problem could be vacant storefronts downtown, and an alternate pathway to kind of towards revitalization can be, there isn't enough opportunity for young entrepreneurs to open up businesses. So that overlap might be a temporary stores in vacant storefronts downtown. That might not really work for opportunity zones specifically, and it is specifically what I wrote my grad school thesis on. But I think it just kind of illustrates that you find a need, and then you somehow tie it with opportunities to kind of move forward and come up with a creative solution. And it's really important, again, to be data driven as you think about those needs. So to look at the demographics, to look at whatever you can gather from businesses is all really important for just knowing where you are, and then going from there. Just as important as the data is the anecdotal side of talking to stakeholders. You can't always, the numbers won't always tell you what the kind of more entrenched issues are in a given community, or even what some of the creative solutions are. So really getting everyone in a room or a virtual room is really important for buy-in and for ensuring everyone's on the same page and everyone is heard. And then lastly, again, this generally applies more to urban communities, but thinking about how to avoid unintended consequences like displacement, and making sure that one solution doesn't then create problems for a whole other group. So you've got needs, and then you've got assets. And these assets are obviously crucially important. And I think you all did a good job of starting to outline those in your business development plan. But thinking about primarily anchor institutions are a great starting point. Do you have hospitals, churches, universities, et cetera, that have general buy-in in the success of the community? Whether or not they play a role as an investor, which almost always they won't or can't, it's really essential having them at the table, and their ability to kind of leverage their institutional knowledge and connections, et cetera. Another big asset, city-owned land, or kind of anything that the government owns or controls, can make a big difference for investors as they consider what they're doing. There's a project in Grand Junction where they're using some city-owned land and kind of making a project happen that otherwise wouldn't have been able to, just because they are using government-owned land in the opportunity zone. Again, partnerships, this ties in with anchor institutions, but thinking about community groups, it seems like MOB is pretty well positioned right there. Human capital, what are the strengths? What do people do well? What are they ready for in your area? Regulatory resources, you can expedite a project through kind of fast track permitting. We've seen work really well in Colorado Springs. Zoning, you can tack on additional incentives. You can say, if you build workforce housing, we'll waive your tap fees if it's in an opportunity zone, something like that. And then success stories. Investors are obviously, I don't want to say, they are risk averse, definitely, and it is risky to be the first in a given area. So finding, even if it's not in your specific area, but even in the broader region, finding a parallel project that has worked and has received OZ funding can really move those investors along. And then thinking about, how do we really find the sweet spot for which projects you should highlight and focus on, prioritize. And we like to use this little triangle here of at the intersection of the suitability for private capital, local resources leveraged, and community needs addressed. So in the bottom left corner with for private capital and doesn't really address many community needs, well, then the community isn't benefiting too much from it and probably not worth putting too much of their limited hours into. And then at the top, if it is very suitable for private capital but doesn't need a lot of local resources, well, again, it probably doesn't need the opportunity zone incentive to make it happen. Maybe it would happen anyway and doesn't need all that much. And then the bottom right, this is like the highways that OZs don't touch. Is, it might really be a community need. There might be a lot of local resources needed, but it might not be very suitable at all for private capital. So kind of finding that nice Goldilocks zone in the middle there of just the right amount of suitability for private capital, the need for government to kind of partner up with other institutions and to find other incentives to make it work. That's what we call the sweet spot. And then these are just communities. I won't read these all word for word. It's a pretty text-heavy slide, and I've been talking for a while, but I think I'll send these out after. I think that the key things to think about, again, are what are the needs, what are the assets, and then specifically targeting what projects do we want to see and support and boost up. And then if you're able to get down to that project level, investors, they want to see the hard numbers. What's the rate of return? What is community doing to facilitate it? And this is just kind of taking it back a bit broader. I did say I would try to end on a more optimistic note than I started with. So even though we've pretty much plunged into another recession, we're really confident that opportunity zones can be a tool for kind of jump starting that recovery for this. And from what we've seen from surveys, investors are very confident. They're still moving forward with projects. We definitely saw them all hit the pause button in March, but really it picked right back up again, and we're pretty optimistic on that front. And I should note that there's been more flexibility at the federal level in the time it takes to deploy capital into a project, just because COVID has disrupted global supply chains and everything it takes to get a project built. There's more flexibility in timelines and whatnot through thanks to some temporary measures. Just earlier this week, the White House put out a report on what data they've gathered so far. Unfortunately, the data is not publicly available. So it's reported directly to the IRS, and then the federal government has access to it. At the state level, I only know what people tell me and what I read in the news. But we're taking their word for it. There's $75 billion invested into, or at least in funds that would then be deployed as of the end of 2019. And within opportunity zones, just broadly, they saw a 1.1% increase in home values. And given that it's about half homeowners, half renters in opportunity zones, that means this incentive has created about $11 billion in new wealth just in the first couple of years here. And then they looked at operating businesses, and they saw that compared to operating businesses in what would have been eligible census tracts that were not selected for OZs compared to those that were selected in OZs, operating businesses received 29% more investment than the it's not very scientific, but then the control group of not selected OZs. Again, there's more flexibility with the capital as a response to the COVID supply chains, et cetera. Another thing that I've been hearing from investors is they're really bullish on the Western Slope and rural Colorado generally. The governor himself is expecting to see a lot more population growth in rural and western Colorado, and in a lot of ways, this is kind of what I was getting at the beginning. Because our zones are so big and rural, it really means that there's a lot more options available, and we are ready to take on, to kind of seize this new wave of growth that appears to be coming. So I think the more that communities can do to really position themselves for that, if they want it, again, it's down to the local level whether folks want more people moving in. I think typically that is a good thing, but it's up to the local level. We looking towards we can't ignore the elephant in the room of the election in November and a potential administration change. I had a sigh of relief that I think my job will still exist no matter who is president in January. Joe Biden did release a plan, an economic plan that would definitely include opportunity zones with some reforms. And from what I've heard from folks at the federal level, they say that even if Trump is reelected, it's pretty likely that the program will be reformed in some ways. The timelines might become more flexible, but the incentive isn't going anywhere, despite whatever the political, the changing political tides. And then again, just to kind of remind you all of there's some urgency definitely with getting that 10% elimination of capital gains, and for that the gain needs to be placed into an opportunity fund by the end of 2021. And the last note is just we're really optimistic about operating businesses receiving more investment, and that's why we launched our Capital Accelerator program. And really, since Treasury clarified some of the guidelines back in January, we've seen a huge uptick in operating business investment, and we see this, compared to some real estate projects where it's questionable as to whether it is built for the people that already live in a given neighborhood or if it will be more beneficial to people coming from outside. With operating businesses, it's a little easier to kind of draw the line of direct impact and community wealth building that we want to see through this incentive. So definitely optimistic about that, and want to see more operating businesses, particularly in your region, to take advantage of this. I just have as a reference, these are screenshots of Olathe's opportunity zone, just to make sure that that's clear for you all, and we can reference that as needed. But with that, I'll open it up for any questions from you all.
Thanks, Jack. Just remember to unmute yourself if you have questions.
Yeah, hey Jack, I do have a quick question. Are you seeing any trends right now from an investor group perspective, like what types of projects they're actually looking at more than others? Or I know what you showed was a pretty diverse mix of projects, but is there any trends there that people are investing in certain types of projects?
Yeah, great question. And this again, it's hard to answer any questions without contextualizing it with COVID. Well, I guess COVID aside, the most popular investment and what continues to be most popular is multifamily housing. That can be affordable. It can be workforce, which means generally around 80 to 100% of the area median income. So housing has worked and continues to work. I wouldn't say there's, at least again, this is all anecdotal, but it does. It remains kind of the number one most common thing. But within Colorado, particularly with our most prominent Colorado investor, which is 4 Points Funding, we see a lot of kind of outdoor hospitality oriented investments that are pretty well positioned post COVID as folks are thinking more in their backyard as they look to for vacations and recreation, that sort of thing. I'll throw one more in. We've seen a good bit more also in the agriculture space, which I think is pretty encouraging. Whether that's processing facilities or vertical hydroponic farms. I'm not sure if hemp is industry you all have out in Olathe, but that is definitely has drawn some attention. I've had quite a few conversations on that front. Cannabis is another story, and that is because of the federal incentive. That is what is considered a SIM business, but definitely on agriculture, value-added processing facilities, the whole work. So those have all been a lot more part of the conversation recently.
Thanks, and I have another question actually. If nobody else has anything going, no, you go. Well, so then you showed those pictures of the map of Olathe, and I think you kind of talked about how they decided, what spots should be within the opportunity zone, and I guess I'm just kind of wondering why a lot of the area to the west of Olathe, the town of Olathe, is not included in an opportunity.
Yeah, I unfortunately, as I joined in January, I was not actually part of the nomination process, so I can't speak from experience. Again, it was done at the census tract level. I'm not sure whether the tract to the west would have qualified as a distressed low-income census tract or not. But I can dig back on our we did some pretty meticulous note taking, and I can look into that a bit more for you.
And,
Well, I was just wondering.
Paul, is that the other thing, Region 10 was part of it. When I was at Dole, I was part of it too, is also looking where there's opportunity. And so West, and there was a limit to how many could be selected. And even if it was distressed, the fact that Olathe was in this census tract may have pushed more for this census tract to be selected versus another one. So, but Jack can probably find more details on that.
Yeah, and I was just wondering because it is largely agricultural based on that end as well. You know, if there was somebody over there that was interested in some type of processing or hemp facility, there is a lot of that happening over that way. So that's why I was asking.
Okay. Other questions?
I'll ask one more if you don't,
Okay.
if you guys don't mind.
Keep them coming.
So for the qualified funds, the qualified opportunity zone funds, or funds, are those being created more on a local by local people, or are those larger funds that are covering multiple projects? I guess. Is the
Yep.
question.
Good question. Yeah, the easiest answer is both. I think it's more common to see the bigger institutional funds. I think more so recently, they've been seeing smaller and smaller size funds and more local investors tapping into it. So it can work either way. I've been really encouraged to see is cities, not necessarily cities themselves, but economic development groups partnering with private investors to kind of invest in a suite of local businesses has definitely a model we're seeing more of. There's one city in Colorado. I don't know how public they are with it all, but they're doing just that. They're creating their own local fund, and I think in some ways, if you can have a diverse enough portfolio within a given municipality, then and if you have the local capital gains to invest into it, I think that model is proving itself out more and more.
And I would add, Delta County is working on their prospectus right now and working with consultants. And that is one thing that they're exploring is to have a local fund in addition to seeking external dollars. So that might be a good, depending on where that goes, that could be a good model to share here of what they end up deciding.
Yeah, I mean, I would think that if you could get over the hurdle of the administrative part of actually operating the fund itself, if it's local, then it seems like there would be more of an ability to guide the impact to the community where it's most needed. So I don't know, maybe that, yeah, I think it's a good idea to kind of take a look at what, if Delta is doing that or taking a look at that, how that kind of rolls out a little bit here in the next few months or however long it's going to take.
Yep. And that's something that I think we want to make more a part of our outreach efforts is just to try and help tap in and build awareness locally and to tap into local dollars, talking to, wealth managers and other groups like that may not have already considered, channeling investment into this way.
Great. Okay. Well, we have the presentation, which we'll share with the group. We'll also have the recording that you can either go back to or direct others to listen in on and watch. I want to thank Jack for taking time, and hopefully this won't be the last you hear from the group in Olathe.
I hope not.
It's a mighty group, so they're really good to work with. So, and once we're out of COVID restrictions, we would love to have you and Mike over here to come visit Olathe and see what's happening and what's happening on the Western Slope once you guys can get out of Denver.
Yeah, definitely. I'm eager to do so as well.
Okay.
But thank you all again, and I'll share out some. Maybe I'll send it to Trish, and Trish, you can forward out some additional resources, fact sheets, links to our grants, and my contact information if you don't already have it.
Thank you.
Great. And then I think when we meet again, when we can talk about this as a steering committee to see if it prompted ideas or interests. So, okay.
Yep, I'm happy to do a follow-up whenever